we will, I think, begin. So I'm going to start with the practicalities. We would like to record this session so that it can be shared and seen by other people afterwards. If you're not comfortable with that, you are welcome to hide your face and you are welcome to change your name. I know there's a way of doing that because my daughter's school friends all do it on online learning and they find it hilarious. So if you're not comfortable with having your name pop up at all, then please do feel free to mute. Shuaib and I haven't known each other for very long. We've never met in person. This is the first time I've looked at his face, but we've exchanged a lot of very honest conversations online. And we've decided to do this, but we're going to admit that we're both very nervous, I think, coming at it from slightly different perspectives. But so this is going to be a difficult conversation. It's a conversation about privilege. It's a conversation about whiteness. It's a conversation about race. I am someone who grew up in Buckinghamshire, in the home counties, to white parents, university educated parents. It was always assumed that I would go to university. There was never any question about it. I have never been stopped by the police. I have never had to worry about where my next meal comes from. I'm very privileged, and it's only very recently that I've started, and my emphasis on started, to go through this journey of realizing how lucky I am without being defensive about it, without saying, well, I'm not a bad person, and trying to take some active steps towards what Alison Creel earlier called equity. So Shuaib, do you want to introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about why the approach we're taking?
Hello everyone, my name's Shuaib Khan. You probably know me from the 90s music on Twitter. This conversation, I think it's long overdue. I think the silence that we as educators have towards issues around race it needs to be spoken. Our conversation needs to start immediately. And I think myself and Emma are looking for a third way. So we've got two ways in which this vehicle of anti-racism seems to be operating. We have somewhat of an aggressive anti-racist view, and then we have those people that are refusing to speak up. Myself and Emma are looking to have an off-the-cuff conversation as reflective practitioners, giving opportunity to delve into dialogue that's really, really important. And not only that, sensitive conversations that we can tackle the uncomfortable comfortably together. So that's what we're looking to do today. And yeah, fingers crossed there'll be an opportunity for some questions later as well.
Brilliant. And this is just the beginning of a dialogue, so we want to keep talking to you. We will leave room for questions. I've set an alarm for the last 5 minutes. We'll leave room for questions, but just let's keep this conversation going. And I suppose what we want to do is model something that's reflective and honest, and it will be stop-start, and we'll interrupt each other, and you know, God knows we're talking absolute rubbish at times. I'm sure I will, but we're going to go for it. So we're going to talk about three things. We could talk about this all day, by the way, but we've decided on three things. So we're going to talk about white silence. So we're going to talk about silence, first of all. And then we're going to talk about racism, because I grew up thinking racism didn't really exist because my parents were liberal and tolerant, and I'm married to an Asian, so how could racism exist in my life? And then finally, we're going to talk about the question, where are you from? So we've decided to hone in on those three things. So starting with silence, well, this is the story of how Shuaib and I, well, no, actually, it goes back, doesn't it? Because one day Shuaib and I will do a joint presentation on toxic schools, because that's how we bonded. He's written a book, a brilliant book about experience of working in a toxic school. And that's actually initially how we bonded. And he does talk about things that aren't race. You know, brown people do talk about things that aren't race. Discovery. But it was the weekend that George Floyd was murdered. And I was really busy that weekend. My husband's a journalist, so the news is on 24/7, and I'd conditioned myself actually to come in here just to avoid the news, because through COVID it was just doing my head in. And he said something to me, and I sort of registered. And then my daughter, who's 12, came down and said, this thing has happened, and she knew all about it. Her friends. So just to be clear, my children are half Asian. Not that all her friends were talking about it. They weren't talking about fashion on Instagram. And initially, we didn't want her to be on Instagram. We thought she'd be talking about boyfriends and makeup, but she wasn't. She was talking about George Floyd. But I was really busy. I was writing an academic paper. And so she and I had a couple of rushed conversations, as you do when you're trying to work. And then I just put my head down again. And I read Shuaib's blog, I think on the Tuesday, and he, yeah, and he outlined, well, I'll let him speak about what he outlined, but the excuses people use not to engage. And I pretty much ticked them all off. I'm too busy. My platform's for other things. I don't talk about things like this. I'm talking about it at home, so I don't have to talk about it publicly. I'm too tired. It's too upsetting. And I thought, blimey, so that's how I got in touch with him. So I'll shut up for a minute.
I think Emma's absolutely correct. I myself, coming from an Asian background, Pakistani British background, I initially thought that it won't affect me, and I've got a platform where I need to be PC. But I was vocal about the behaviour of politicians during Grenfell. I was vocal during Brexit. I was vocal during the Windrush. I was vocal during Kashmir, Palestine. The list goes on and on. And I think when you watch that video of George Floyd gasping for his last few breaths, it does evoke a real heartbreak that's very difficult for anyone to accept. The fact that an innocent man was killed, and we as educators, we are educating children of all backgrounds, and our silence is allowing this behavior to manifest and carry on and perpetuate. And I just remember watching the video and having a tear in my eye and thinking, unless I write something, and I've been very blessed to have a platform, and I think what's really important to realize is that platform is privilege, and privilege comes with responsibilities. And we have a wider social responsibility as teachers to make sure we have anti-racist ideas within us and within our practice. So when the conversations, when the blog went out initially, I was not expecting anything from it. Then the podcast went out, and I thought, do you know what? It's an opportunity to really open up a dialogue, also challenge my own implicit biases, and get us talking about race, because it's the elephant in the room, and it's time we caused a stampede.
You know what? I haven't even watched that video. That's only just occurred to me. And interesting what you said about what teachers have platforms. So I contacted you about this at the time. So let's say a teacher I know, a young teacher, a new teacher, took her initiative, and she, like many people, was, because this is it. This is what I realized by the Tuesday, was my friends were viscerally traumatized. I was going to say upset, but no, broken by George Floyd's death. And then to add insult to injury, that sort of almost tokenism of everyone running to the nearest brown person or black person to ask them for advice on how they should behave as a white person, you know. And it was just, there was so much rage and so much upset. And my friend, should we say, someone who was a new teacher, went off and she compiled a whole load of really good quality resources for her school. And she wrote in and said, and she didn't share them with everybody. She wrote to the SLT, and she was completely knocked back and said, now is not the time. And I still don't quite understand that, because actually the leader who knocked her back was black, and she's what? Well, she's Greek. So I still can't get my head around that. Sure, but I still can't get my head around it. I think it was almost like, you can't feel my pain. How dare you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you are. The conversation you're saying is absolutely true. Whenever I mention stop and search, for example, and my friends who are English, they're white, they always say, "Oh, Shuaib, you know, it happens in life. It's something you learn to accept. It becomes something a banal part of your day-to-day life." I think with regards to schools and opening up this dialogue, you're asking people to challenge generations of implicit biases. That is not going to happen overnight. And I think to expect it to happen overnight over one incident, because we've had incidents before. We've had Tamir Rice, we've had Trayvon Martin, and the list goes on and on and on. We've had them in Britain with Stephen Lawrence. And if you look further, we've had issues with the Windrush generation, where there's been these key moments in history where we could reflect on our practice and change our practice. I think the reason why we don't is because at the very top of society, there's a status quo that doesn't seem to want to be damaged or broken, that doesn't seem to want to have these anti-racist ideas. Even if you look at the curriculum, the way it's designed, the energy, the passion, the hard work, the dedication from our educators to embed these anti-racist ideas, our government doesn't invest the same energy in black and ethnic minority people. The COVID crisis, my mother's at risk, I'm at risk, my entire family's at risk. There's no, what was the word he used? Protective bubble, or whatever he used, something like that, around the black and ethnic minority community. So again, we're asking people of power to acknowledge our grievances. And I think when we don't have authentic voices, we're allowing gatekeepers, racialized gatekeepers, to speak on our behalf. I don't think Sajid Javid speaks on my behalf. I've got an uncle called Javid, and that's about it. I don't think Preeti Patel speaks for me. The pain is so raw. The pain is there in the room. It's sat with us, and we need this conversation right now more than ever. But it has to start at the bottom, and it has to start with us teachers, really, and our parents and our upbringing of our children. But it's everyone's problem. Until we make it a political problem, a big political problem, it's everyone's problem.
Yeah, I mean, you used the word pain. Angie's in this chat. Angie, can I bring you in actually just for a minute? It wasn't part of the plan, but Angie's used the word horror, and actually that's what came off. And my friends in the wake of this. Angie, do you want to come in and just say a little bit more about your comment in the chat box?
Yeah, sorry, I've got a loudness behind me. So I think I didn't watch the video for ages. And that was because I am so sick of seeing black bodies in that way, because we fetishize it, because it's made into a thing, and because my whole news feed can sometimes become endless scenes of things that we know to be horrific. And when I did watch it, I then thought, as a human being, how have we got to the point where, as a human being, this can be recorded and the world is not saying this is a terrible point we have reached in terms of humanity? Because human being to human being, watching somebody else extinguish somebody else's life is horrific. Whatever your outlook, wherever you stand on the issue of race. And so what really devastated me was then to feel that people I feel have not just a personal platform, but an organizational platform, not saying this is horrific. This is horrific. Even I'm coming to terms with the horror of this, and as an organization, we will pin our colors to a mast, but we're coming to terms with it along with the rest of the world. And that's the feeling of disappointment I think I had as a black person. It's just like, when are people going to say that they also feel it? Surely this isn't a pain that I bear because I'm a black person. Surely this is a human horror. Surely this is a human pain we all bear.
Absolutely. Same with Grenfell. The exact same with the Grenfell situation. Any sort of discrimination or persecution of anyone across the world, you've got to feel the pain. We're all human beings. We should be feeling that on a day-to-day level, and it should be acted upon immediately. I totally agree.
This is it. And it is painful. And actually, I mean, as a kind of pitiful comparison to your pain, as a white person, it's deeply uncomfortable to be told that you have implicit bias. We all have implicit bias, but it's deeply uncomfortable to be told that you have prejudice and to come to terms with those things. And there was a line in, I've written down because my memories, what's it called? Me and My White Supremacy, where Layla Saad talks about, I'm going to help you come to terms with your racism. And there was a moment where I thought, what racism? I'm going to be honest, and there was a whole afternoon of, I absorbed myself all day last Monday in Layla Saad and why I'm no longer talking to white people about race, and Afua Hirsch, and it was brilliant. My afternoon was all brain power and actually what can I do? And I got to the evening, I suddenly felt so low. You just think, and you can see it's hard.
Absolutely.
I mean, but not nearly as bloody hard as living as a minority and dealing with day-to-day racism, which we're going to talk to you about in a second.
Absolutely. I think, Emma, you are right. 100%.
Yeah. I mean, and they're just coming on to that, and this is the things I am guilty of. So I'm guilty of silence. I'm guilty of naivety, and just assuming that actually racism doesn't really exist anymore. And I think I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and we genuinely, we acted out the don't see color. We acted it out. So there was an Asian girl in my village. No one ever referred to the fact that she was Asian, but she was known as the naughty girl. My best friend at school was black. We never talked about the fact that she was black, ever. And Afua Hirsch talks about this, and she talks about how her best friend said to her when she was in sixth form, I think she's slightly younger than me, said, don't worry, Afua, I don't see you as black. And so we've got into this sort of, well, if we pretend it's not there. So we talked quite a lot about microaggressions. So so I've never been stopped by the police. I've never been stopped by airport security. I have, what else have I never, I mean, I've never had to worry for my safety while walking out at night. I've never stood in a room and looked around and felt like a minority. I felt like the odd one out. Never. My accent, my appearance, I've been described as ordinary, and that's a good thing, as a compliment in an interview. You're quite ordinary, so you should fit in. And then when I know I'm married, my husband is Asian, as I've mentioned, and he's been called a Paki, but we've kind of laughed about it. And we talked a bit about laughter, didn't we? You know, we kind of, and laughter's brilliant, but we use it as a way of kind of, in this case, trivializing something that actually, anyway, so you were going to talk to us a little bit about some of the racism that you've experienced.
In terms of day to day, I back to like what your point was, Emma. You were never seen as ordinary. I had no choice. From the very day of birth, I was given a category. I was Asian, British, Pakistani. And right throughout my time at primary school, my first ever racist incident when I was 4 years old at infant school in the playground. And one of the children said, I don't want to play with the Paki. And I will never forget that. 24 years on, I'm sat here right now. I will never forget going home and trying to scrub my skin white and crying over and over again because I didn't fit in. And as I got through secondary school, I remember teachers being very passively aggressive towards me, saying things like, you know, you can't question certain norms and values. Then when I think my first stop and search was when I was 12, but the most notable stop and search, Emma, was when I was at university. So me and my friend Liam, I've said to him, he said you can use my name. We were walking, we just had a great day at university. Sun was out. It was around February time, late February, 2012. And we were walking down the road and a police officer pulled us over. He goes, boys, where are you going? Oh, we're just going to get a quick drink, you know. Can you explain what you're doing here? What your purpose of your visit is? Why are you in Leicester? We're at university. And our white friends just walked off and we got pulled over. Apparently we were suspicious and fit certain criteria. We got asked several questions. Our bags got searched. And then we went to the pub where our friends were sat. And one of our friends said to us, is this something that happens quite a lot? And my friend Liam looked at me, said, all the time. It's something you become accustomed to. And not that you should. It's not something that you should become accustomed to. But because you're afraid of speaking up about it or having that dialogue, my nephew, who's 4 years old, we're training him for altercations with the police at 4 years old. We're telling him, you know, in case something happens, unless we're stopped at security in airports, you know, we're always constantly, even like we're saying things like, you know, don't use your full Muslim name. We shouldn't be doing this. We should be proud of our identity. My granddad came in 1956. We've been living in this country for many, many years. He's passed, God bless his soul. I would like to see progress. We shouldn't be afraid of our identity at all. But it's absolutely frightening to think that these are small incidents. But I remember when you told me to write them down, I think I wrote about 200 down, 300 down. It's insane.
So, I mean, a lot of people referring to their children. I know Angie's tweeted quite openly about her son and her deep concern and upset for him. And Anjum's just put a message about her son, I think. So it's just flown past. I mean, what kind of messages can we give that next generation? So, I mean, my daughter was called a Paki for the first time at school, and she came home. This was 3 months ago. She's 12 when she was 12, and she came and she laughed, and they said you're a Paki, all you need is a bindi. And she laughed it off, and I was furious, but she was determined. She said it was only a joke. And I mean, I don't know what and this is, I'm doing that thing, aren't I? I'm asking the brown person to tell me what to do. Tell me what to do. No, but you know, it's that, how I'm asking myself as well. It's how we bring those children up to offer that some hope for that next generation, because let's face it, this one's effed it up.
Absolutely. But also, I think, Emma, it works on very much at the level that we're speaking on, the educational level. I think the impact a school and teachers can have on weeding out these implicit biases, the ability to hire staff from different backgrounds, to have not token assemblies. The last thing we need is another assembly on Black Lives Matter, because this should be embedded throughout the curriculum. It should be a day-to-day part of our day-to-day interactions. And really, and it's back to, I think, Angie Angie said, I think it's about just bringing the idea of being a human back into day-to-day conversation, the idea of compassion and empathy. These are things we should be embedding into our children anyway, not hate and difference and division all the time. So really at the very grassroots level, bringing that in.
Yeah. Huma says she has a question. Do you want to come in? Huma, do you want to speak? Hello.
You can see me. I can't see myself, so I don't know if you can see my head or like the top of my head.
I can see green.
Ooh. If I need to find my face. Anyway, I'll adjust myself. Oh, I know why. Now you can see me.
Yay.
Hi, how are you? I hope everyone's well. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, my question is that I work in a school which is predominantly Pakistani in Buckinghamshire. Yes. And often I'll have a question with the students, and I teach maths and statistics. So I've often said, oh, I've worked for the Office for National Statistics. I said, oh, really? Did you work for them, miss? Are you sure you're not MI5? And we have this whole, I was like, no, statistics. But having this conversation led to something about identity. And I found that, I don't know, scary or what. I identify myself as British. And then I'm Pakistani because that's my ethnicity. But what I find with these group of boys, and I'm very conscious, I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush, but they were very conscious that they were, yes, British because they were born here, but their alliances lay in Pakistan. And I said, well, why is that? How often do you go? Oh, we go every summer, blah, blah, blah. But they said, we don't feel part of Britain because of the way we're treated. And that's very sad because we are all part of the system. We all have so much potential to give back, but it's almost like them and us, and that kind of reminds me of across the pond mentality coming from there.
Yes.
So I just wanted to know, Shuaib's or your experience or your advice of how to tackle these conversations then again.
Huma, thank you. Honestly, hand on heart, this is something I've had in many schools. I've had boys walk up to me and use words like coconut and, you know, you've bought into the white system and things like that. I think that makes me question my own identity more than anything. It makes me want to empathize with their plight, but also use the education system to help them to be socially mobile and get out of the situation they're in. I think it's such a tricky one, but I genuinely think most parents back home, particularly in the Pakistani community, that's where I'm from, most parents actually still value education at its very core. So I think perhaps having that dialogue with the parents would be the best way forward. I remember we had an Asian teacher in high school, and I ain't gonna lie, we made his life miserable, the poor guy. He left after one term because of us. We were that bad. But we thought that he was subverting from our perceptions of what it meant to be an Asian male. Over time, I think we began to develop a bit of a rapport. But I think with those sort of children, they just want to feel at home in the classroom. So if you can drop the odd bit of, you know, Punjabi in there like I used to, maybe even the odd conversation about how things are at home, it breaks that cultural boundary, which, because you've got the culture in the background, but you've also been educated at a level as well. So you can bridge that sort of animosity and tension between the two. But I don't see why you can't. It's definitely a possibility. And just keep plugging away. I was a part of that British Pakistani cohort, and we were given every label under God hot sun. I remember there's a prevent training, and it was specifically for us. So I think we do feel targeted at times, but we do need more positive Asian role models in the classroom, showing us there is another way apart from the streets.
See, this reminds me of the story you told me, Shuaib, about your colleague who was your Asian colleague who was approached about FGM because the assumption was that she would be familiar with it, and is this almost an extension of me going to my black friends for advice? You know, it's this, well, you can do it. And there was a story Alison was talking about earlier where she gave a case study of a young black male teacher who wanted to be head of English but was put as a pastoral leader because he was actually in charge of all the black boys, basically. Is it just an extension, these assumptions that I bet you make a nice curry. So there's microaggressions. I have to say my husband does make a nice curry, but that
I can make a cracking curry as well, just to let everyone know. More than welcome round. Anyone in Peterborough, just let me know. Let me know 24-hour notice, I promise you.
Oh, yeah. So, okay, well, we've got about 10 minutes left. We're going to go on to our last point. So this was the question about the where are you from question. So this is where I come. So I took my husband to meet my great auntie Val, okay, in Purley, and she said, "Rav, where are you from?" And he said, "Winchester." She said, "No, Rav, where are you really from?" She said, "He said the Royal County Hospital in Winchester." He said, "Rav, no, where are you really from?" "Well, I was brought up in London." "No, Rav, where are you really from?" And she wouldn't let it lie. We've heard this a million times, this story in various different forms, and then so she finally realised she wasn't going to get anywhere. So she said, "Right, let's all say Happy New Year in our own language. Rav, you start." So anyway, so this is, we've each heard this story in 100 iterations. So we got into this thing of where are you from, and this balance between being curious about our students and what they like to eat and the music they like to listen to, and in my case, my students, many of them refugees, their journeys to this country, their parents, their grandparents' journeys to this country. So that balance between curiosity and building rapport, and that awful question, where are you from?
It's a question that's followed me, Emma, many, many times. People, my complexion, for example, I've been assumed to be Italian, Jewish, the list goes on and on. I think initially, everyone's curious, and that curiosity is really important. People want to know where you're from, they want to know your background, they want to have some idea of things they can do to make you feel a bit more welcome into their social circle. It's a question that I think is often very naive. But until you've got a firm understanding of the person, their habits, their behaviors, it's not a question you can simply ask off the cuff. It can come across quite racist, it can come across quite rude. And I think, again, it's the whole idea that we are gearing towards asking this question, but we're so fearful, we're so desperate to create this distinction between us and them. We share the same liberties. Why do we need to be asking where people are from? We're in the same country. We abide by the same laws. So is it really important where we're from? Because I grew up on the staple of beans on toast. That makes us more similar than different. So perhaps, even stripping it away a bit. And before you ask someone where they're from, look at the similarities before you pitch such a question and develop that rapport, as you are saying, particularly with our learners, because it can be quite alienating to be asked that question repeatedly. Because I'm from Peterborough. The people ask, where are you really from? Peterborough. Where are your parents from? Peterborough. Where are your grandparents from? Peterborough. Is there anything? Where are they really from? Oh, Kashmir.
You got there in the end. Yeah. I knew it. It's something that I think it was Penny Rabiger, who suggested you just say to people, what's your story? And see what comes out. I mean, the where are you from is interesting though, and I don't know whether, I almost think of London as a microcosm in itself. So I've pretty much always worked in London. So my students actually talk constantly about where they're from and their journeys and everything else. And we have those conversations all the time. But I suppose I'd built those relationships first. And my children, as you know, grow up in Hertfordshire. So daughter goes to school in Hertfordshire, similar complexion to yours, possibly slightly lighter. They would pass for Italian. They've got grey-green eyes, which confuses everybody. And then they meet their dad and they get nice suntan compliments. So, but she never, ever talks about her family or being in any way any different to anyone else, because I suppose she passes for not. I took her to my school in London, which I've been doing for years, but this was last year when she was in year 7. And in the car on the way home, she was really quiet. And I said, are you all right? What's the matter? She said, people kept asking where I was from. And I said, but that's how the students talk to each other in my school. That's one of those conversations. So I just thought it was an interesting twist on that question.
But again, you want to foster that curiosity, don't you, with our young people? But you want to foster it in a sensitive way. You don't want to completely move away. I think once we stop talking about asking important questions and stop talking about race, we allow it to fester and explode and manifest in a totally and perpetuate in a different way. We've got to harness it really carefully. And that's why I think our role, particularly as not as teachers, but as reflective practitioners, is so important about reflecting on past experiences and the experience that we have, and then binding them in our future conduct and our future practice is absolutely imperative.
I mean, just we're running out of time, and I do want to leave time for questions. But lots of people have mentioned the curriculum, and we were going to go there with the curriculum, and we thought it's such a huge topic. But I hope, because we all, in our London school, that the new English curriculum. I mean, if anyone teaches English at secondary, it is dead white men with checking out my history thrown into the poetry collection, so that almost, so that people can say, well, look, it's Dickens, it's Shakespeare, it's Bronte, it's so I heard there may be someone on here knows more about it actually, but I hope that actually this shock will, it's that balance. It's all about that third way, isn't it, Shuaib? Because it's that balance. So I was listening to Woman's Hour the other day, and they were talking, it was some black female authors talking about getting published, and one of them got really angry. She said, I would not be here on this program if George Floyd hadn't been murdered. And she was furious. And our friend, she won't mind, Aisha Small was on Woman's Hour, and she said to Jane Garvey, you've got a feature about cooking later, why aren't you asking me about cooking? And so I think I've gone into 2 points at once, but you know, I don't know.
It is. Very often people assume that people from black and ethnic minority backgrounds are a homogenous group, that we all feel the same way. My friend Liam, who's black, he's been stopped and searched 40 times. I've been stopped and searched 12 times. There's differentiation between individual groups in terms of social class, gender, ethnicity. Like, for example, my mother, who wears a headscarf, she comes from an Pakistani Asian background as well. Her experience of racism is very different from mine as a male, just as someone who might be in a wheelchair. So again, there's stratification in there as well. But I think when we're having this dialogue and this conversation, I think we have to strip back the aggressive overtones and not move away from existing power structures. We've got to use these power structures to implement change, because we are in a democracy, and obviously we need change to happen quicker and right now. But to be aggressive in our overtones and shut down people, I don't think works.
I'm not sure about the word aggressive, because I've been listening to a lot of my female friends, and sometimes women are accused of being aggressive when actually they're being assertive. I don't know whether I'm quite, I don't know whether anyone wants to say anything about the word aggressive.
There's a fine line, isn't there? I'm digging myself a hole, ain't I? So,
well, yeah. Because you can't always be nice. And that's something I've realized. I've tended to assume that I can just be nice to everyone and the world will be a nice place. And if someone is actually being blatantly unjust, so the word aggressive, I mean, I had a black colleague who had a conflict with a white colleague, and pretty much the white colleague told her she was an aggressive black woman.
I get that all the time. Not a black woman, but I get all the time, very regularly. Oversensitive, too passionate, and aggressive are the three words that I used when can come across in the wrong way as well. It itself is layered with microaggressions, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Sanam wants to make a point. Sanam, do you want to make a point about the word aggressive? Sorry, the chat is brilliant. It's moving so fast, though.
It's more about the lack of it. I think more recently when I've been talking about issues of race within schools and giving a platform to young people that I teach who want to talk about it, the compliments that we get always tell us that we're very measured. And I find that a really strange compliment, this idea that I have to have a level head if I want to talk about something that's important to me and something that I've had to deal with since the day I was born and not had a choice with. The fact that I've had to navigate racial injustice my whole life, and that I'm now in a position where I want to equip young people to not have to deal with that, but really knowing that I have to teach you how to navigate the injustice and still be the best person. And this idea that being measured is a compliment, I find really uncomfortable. But it's almost like I can't challenge you on it, because if I challenge you on it, then I'm aggressive. So I have to just be okay with the fact that you're glad that I'm not passionate, I think is what is being said. And I find it really, really unusual. And that there are lots of other things I'm allowed to be passionate about. You know, I'm allowed to be really passionate about whether or not we mark in red pen, but I'm not allowed to be really passionate about whether or not it's okay to tear down statues. And so, yeah, that I find that there's a really interesting rhetoric there as to how comfortable we have to be with how other people brand how we engage with these conversations.
There's this is the stratification again, isn't there? There's a real gender thing here, because even earlier today I saw a man speak really passionately about some of these subjects, and his voice broke, and he really passionate, and would that have come across, obviously to this audience it would have been fine, but for a woman to speak and let her voice break and have her upset to be seen, that's really interesting. Do you want to say anything, Shuaib?
I think as Sanam is saying, she's absolutely correct. We're bridging a very tight gap here, where we have to be objective and measured in our teaching practice, but once we become passionate and lose our objectivity, it's deemed as overtly sensitive. Not even if we lose our objectivity, it just seems as though we're unable to come across rationally. when we are feeling irrational or emotional or aggressive, should I say, about an injustice that we faced our entire lives.
And there's also something about the fact that we have to be objective.
Yes, yes.
Like, I'm not allowed to talk about this from an experience perspective.
Yes.
Never mind that I've dealt with it for 32 years, but
Exactly.
I'm not allowed to talk about experience. I have to find the research and tell you that other people have researched and said that this is true, that it's been, the DfE have put a date on it as to when this is branded as true fact. That there has to be objectivity. Like, why is subjectivity not a valuable perspective in this issue when it clearly is?
You're right. Why is lived experience not allowed to be a massive part of our empirical findings of what we do in the classroom?
Yeah.
It could be.
Anjum would like to say something.
Hi, yeah, just on the issue of objectivity, sometimes I think it's used as a stick to beat people with, people who are passionate or who do feel anger and rage. I mean, I understand that we need to have a dialogue, but don't minimalize or trivialize that passion and their truth, because what you're doing is saying, actually, that's not valid because it's not coming in a particular package. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. Just because it's not being objective and conformist, we're saying that actually that's devoid of something that can be considered, and that's not the case at all. That whole idea of objectivity is something that is used to constrain people, I feel.
It's a snobbery that comes across in academia a lot, where qualitative research versus quantitative research, and there are whole journals of debate on it. But yeah, it's a thing in academia as well. And no, interesting that overlap. Right, we've got about 2 minutes. Who would like to say something? Just jump in.
I'm going to jump in, Emma. I want to say aggression is something that I think we all need to look at in our schools around Black men and Black women. Most of the people I coach are women. A lot of Black women that I coach feel that they're often accused, if they even dare to speak, of being aggressive. I've worked with a lot of Black men who find it very difficult to present themselves in the workplace because they feel that that often they're not accused of aggression. Other people will describe them as being a bit scared, a bit, I don't
Scary.
want to.
Yes.
And that, how many stereotypes of the Black scary man do we need to have in our lives to before we look at that?
Absolutely.
Is it scary, or do you feel uncomfortable being in a room with a Black person? These are different things.
It seems to be
and that discomfort is something that is baked into our culture, because we constantly see images. If we're looking at films and we see a Black man with a hoodie in a film, he will be a mugger. If we then are on a street ourselves and there's a Black man in a hoodie behind us, we can't help it. It's baked into our culture. But the hard question to answer is, do I feel fear in this situation, as opposed to, is that person being aggressive? So I just wanted to add that.
And actually, when we're having these conversations with people about race and racism and privilege, people are going to feel uncomfortable, and that can ease. And we've seen it happens all the time. I've done it. People get defensive. Yeah, I've done it. Well, are you calling me a racist? My husband's brown. How can you? But yeah. So actually, that's that projection, isn't it? It's really interesting. We've got time for one more, and then we've got the closing panel starting in about 30 seconds, but it's live streamed, so it doesn't matter if we jump on in. Okay, thank you so much, everybody. Well, as I did say, this was going to be just the beginning of a conversation. We've barely scraped the surface, have we?
We've got a lot of things on the agenda. We haven't quite got to them, but it's fantastic. You guys brought some fantastic ideas and helped us learn as well, which is really important.
Yeah. Oh God, I almost feel a sense of we haven't done this justice now, which is good, because if I was going right, sorted. There you go, equity, done. But I almost feel quite frustrated, and as if we haven't quite done this justice at all. Yes, thank you everybody so much. Please do come onto the final panel. It's gonna be brilliant, and it will be live streamed straight onto the NTLD Twitter feed. And yes, we will do more, won't we? Okay.
There is a third way. There is a third way.
Thank you. Take care.